Hi, friends. This is Dr. Richard Ruling welcoming you to the YouTube channel and also to Hebrew Nation Radio podcast. Um, have some, I think, interesting and good information to share and want to go through it with you. My perspective is that I'm coming from a Seventh-day Adventist background, but it's big problems for the church. Their prophet Ellen White, whom I believe was inspired by God. Otherwise, she could not have written so accurately with a third grade education because of an injury in childhood. She wrote some of the best stuff on health 100 years before it happened. Specifically, she warned that tobacco was a malignant poison 100 years before the Surgeon General linked malignant tumors to that poison. And she said that drugs did not cure disease but changed the form and location. That's not a modern terminology. Adverse drug reactions would be the modern terminology, but she accurately described what happens when people take a medicine, and had a perfect example of my wife who got a bladder infection and didn't know what to do, got impatient, tried herbs, but went to her doctor for an antibiotic that cured it in just 2 or 3 days, but months later had a rash, went back to her doctor for blood tests, and he called urgently, referring her to a hematologist who did a bone marrow exam in the hospital, then a splenectomy in the hospital, and transfusions in and out of hospitals till she died of a stroke. It's a sad situation, and basically Ellen White was right. The drug antibiotic changed the form and location from a bladder infection to a stroke. And she was right that they seldom cure. Antibiotics come close to doing that, but because they help your body overcome an infection. But one drug salesman told me, the body does about 49%. It might be losing the battle. If you take an antibiotic, it helps you win the battle 51%. But at that point, it's, if you somehow cut out the sugar and took some garlic or other things that stimulate immunity, you might do fine without the antibiotic. So I just say Ellen White was right. She shines. Her school that she founded got $40 million from NIH to determine why Seventh-day Adventists live about 7 years longer than other non-smoking groups, and it really is because of her writings on health. But my point is, this is not possible for a little girl with 3 years education, three grades of education, back more than 170 years ago. She did well, and I believe she was inspired by God. But she said that the church that she founded was copying Israel's history, and the trials and attitudes of the people of God before the first advent were shown to her to represent before the second advent, how there was a control, how the enemy sought to control the minds. Well, the Adventist church controls the minds through presses, what their books print and what the pulpits preach. And if you try to get something in or discuss it, you're shut out in a hurry. But I want to share with you, I think the Hebrew Nation online or other Messianic believers are closer to truth, but the Adventist Church was endorsed, I believe, in Revelation 10th chapter, the bitter belly experience of John, when Millerites proclaimed Christ's coming. It was a bitter belly for them in 1844. The Baptist preacher was wrong, but Adventism grew out of that. But Christ said you must prophesy again. I think it means give those same messages again with better understanding. But Adventism doesn't want to do that. They're so focused on the Sabbath that, as Ellen White said 150 years ago nearly, they're as dry as the hills of Gilboa. Sabbath, 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 while they miss the annual Sabbaths, the yearly. There was God, when He made a covenant with Israel, gave them 7 annual holy convocations, and Adventists think they can't know, won't know, never know for when things are going to happen. But Ellen White said those ceremonies were designed to teach the people that at the time appointed, one would come to whom the ceremony pointed, and clearly that must include the bridegroom's coming in the wedding parables. So, not seeing it, but I'm appealing for Hebrew Nation and Adventists to get closer together. I think Adventists could learn from Hebrew Nation, so I'm doing this for both. And I just want to read something that I wrote for Adventists, and I hope you can tolerate some of this and see the points for what's ahead. And I'm going to put my glasses on as I read this screen, and hope you like it. Dear fellow believer, and I'll put this, I may post this online, and I post this podcast online as well, so that if people prefer to hear while they're doing something else rather than read it directly, that's fine. Dear fellow believer, please give this your best consideration. It offers the highest possible reward, ruler over all that he has, in Luke 12:44, or we will be beaten with stripes in verse 47 if we don't meet conditions in Luke's wedding parable. This is about the wedding parables that show we don't understand them. The invitation is scorned in Matthew 22, where the king makes a marriage for his son and sends his servants to bid people to a wedding feast, but it was scorned by them until the remnant get their city burned. I think that's Adventists, basically, with their city, Loma Linda. Ellen White saw an earthquake, and in the San Francisco earthquake, fire did more damage because of disrupted gas lines. Anyway, in the wedding parable of Matthew 25, they're asleep with their lights out. And I mentioned the bitter belly experience before, but Christ said, prophesy again. And we need to give the same messages again with a better understanding. It's not about a rapture to heaven. Paul said it would be like at the Exodus in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 1. He said, I would not have you ignorant how our fathers passed through the sea. All those things happen for examples written at the end of the world. In 1 Thessalonians 5, 1-3, he again likens it to Egypt, or each phrase, like day of the Lord fits night of the Lord in Exodus 12. Time of judgment, God came as a thief then, and the day of the Lord will come as a thief. Invisibly, suddenly, with sudden destruction. I think the earthquake that's coming. The time of judgment will be repeated, and we are to give with no uncertain sound the message, fear God, give glory to him, the time of his judgment has come. That's Ellen White calling for us to give that first angel's message of Revelation 14, verse 7. But most people perceive judgment as a negative, not seeing that the book of Daniel shows judgment is deliverance. God delivered Daniel and his friends. In the book of Judges, Gideon and Samson were deliverers. The judgment is good news, and it's about a time of when the dead shall. It's not about the time when the judge shall be dead. When the dead shall be judged. Excuse me. Reading. So it's when God will execute judgment, as in Egypt, and America is like Egypt. We have enslaved most people in substances, alcohol, tobacco, drugs, negative lifestyles, and Egypt threw babies in the river. We've thrown 63 million in the trash. We cannot escape judgment. God regarded the covenant as a marriage in Bible times. Hold on, I've got to read the rest of this. We must see how the wedding parables have a provision to prevent loss, and if we've overlooked at the wedding feast in Matthew 22 is really to prevent something bad happening. When God had the covenant with Israel, he got an ignorant bride. They worshipped a calf 40 days later, and it must not happen to Christ. He said, and there's a provision embedded in the wedding parable of Matthew 22. It's the it's the wedding feast, which is at the time of Passover, a feast of unleavened bread. And we don't think that sounds very exciting. Maybe that's why the feast is scorned and ridiculed. But really, that's what we need. Christ, we should think spiritually. Christ said, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, meaning their teachings. And pastors have leavened the bread. They're using poor translations. When they say you can't know, eido means be aware, consider, understand. But his disciples thought Passover, and Christ, each time he said it, gave an example of second Passover a month later, as in the days of Noah, etc. In the Feast of Unleavened Bread at Passover, the parallel is Luke's wedding parable, where three phrases indicate its Passover timing. It says, he said in Luke 12:35, have your loins girded. Well, that goes back to Egypt in Exodus 12:11 when they had their loins girded. He said to be watching, which means be awake, and they were to eat the Passover lamb and leave nothing till morning. And then the third imagery is Luke 12:37, when he will gird himself, make us sit down to eat and serve us. That's what he did on the eve of Passover. So all those things are clues for Passover. If he hadn't given us clues for when, it would be unfair for Christ to ask us to be awake, to watch, because we can't watch every night. But the clues pointing to Passover is the only time in the year that it was commanded to watch. So I like Ellen White's statement also on this. She says, as he, Christ, ate the Passover with his disciples, he instituted in its place the service that was to be the memorial of his great sacrifice. So if we did communion in place of Passover, we would be doing it at Passover, perfect timing to then watch and pray, which is what he also asked his disciples, and they fell asleep. Well, I confess I fall asleep too, and I can't pray very long, but I've discovered how to do it. We eat the Passover lamb spiritually by reviewing the closing scenes of his life, reading the closing chapters, and praying between those chapters. And I like Ellen White's book, Desire of Ages, which is a biography that in the Library of Congress was the most recommended book on the life of Christ for many years. Now they don't recommend one, they just give you a list of all of them. But that's my understanding anyway. And I found it rich with meaning. And I'll try to post a link, if I can remember to do so, in the link below. It would be, I already mentioned that, unfair to ask us to watch if there weren't clues. But Christ is the bridegroom in a spiritual sense, and we want to be his bride as we can best be if we're intelligent. He's looking for a smart bride, and I think he's testing us on whether we understand from the book of Numbers the 9/11 provision. The 9/11 we all know is bad situation for what happened, a terrorist event, but a provision for second Passover is also 9/11. Numbers 9, verse 10 and 11 provide for Passover a month later, as in the days of Noah. The flood came with Passover timing, but second month. And so also at the end of his parables, he said, watch, you don't understand. He didn't say you can't know, won't know, never know when he was talking to disciples. It's about us and our time, and we don't understand it if we don't read and interpret as the days of Noah, or like a man traveling to a far country. If Israelites took a long trip, couldn't get back for Passover, they were to keep it the second month. Passover was time of judgment, and they're not excused from judgment. They had to still keep it. Well, the wedding is in the covenant, and it's a wedding week. Ellen White referred to court week, and it's the last 7 years, but also it might be the week of wedding, because the Passover week is a week of unleavened bread. And so it can have double meaning that way. The wedding is in the covenant that we make, and I'm seeing it as a prenuptial agreement of things that Christ wants from us, things that Elijah must restore. He said that before he comes, Elijah must come and restore all things. God foresaw that pastors would leaven the bread, that we wouldn't be observing everything, but Christ doesn't want an ignorant bride. So beware the leaven, and let's get the leaven out to give 7 topics which have a 7-fold emphasis that have been leavened by mainstream denominations. And we can see them first in the link to Elijah in Malachi 4, chapter 4, verse 4 and 5, where it says, remember the law of Moses with the statutes and judgments, behold, I'll send you Elijah. Those statutes and judgments have a sevenfold emphasis in Ezekiel 20, where they are linked to Sabbaths. If you read it from verse 11 to 24, it's statutes, judgment, Sabbath, statutes, judgment, Sabbath, statutes, judgment, Sabbath. So I'm seeing that things that have a sevenfold emphasis are for end time, like the book of Revelation. 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 thunders, 7 trumpets. So look for things that have a sevenfold emphasis, and I'll just give you an example. Beside the statutes and judgments, in the 10 Commandments you see Lord in all capital letters 7 times. It's because translators took God's name right out of the Bible, ripped it out, and replaced it with a generic title, Lord, in all capital letters. Bad idea. I think they will be judged in eternity. They translated the Bible but might not be in heaven. I don't know. That's up to God. But unless they repented and were sorry later, one was, I know. But anyway, I think we need to understand that we need the protection of a covenant. When God made a covenant with Israel in Exodus 34 verse 10, he says, "Behold, I make a covenant with you. Terrible thing I'm going to do with you. I'm going to drive out the Canaanite." Well, if he would protect them while they drove out the Canaanite, it took peace from the earth. We see the red horse takes peace from the earth, and we can be protected in a time of war if we have a covenant. So we need that, and the covenant is based on those 7 topics of things that have a sevenfold emphasis, I believe. When he knocks, the knock is the earthquake that for when we're to open to him at second Passover with a feast of unleavened bread, and we consider a different topic each day for the 7 days of unleavened bread. So that's just a quick overview. I've got some things on the screen that I want to make sure I'm covering every thought. We should let's see. There's a contextual link in Revelation 6 to each of those topics. I'll give you an example. I mentioned God's name first. John heard thunder in Revelation 6:1, and it is linked to God's name in John 12th chapter, around verse 28, 29, where Christ prayed that God would glorify his name. And the people standing around thought it thundered. So, and also again in Revelation 14 verse 1, the 144,000 have the Father's name in their forehead, and in the next verse there are lightnings and thunderings. So thunder's linked to God's name. It's in the first seal, the white horse, which is a message of truth for end time. The second horse is the red horse, takes peace from the earth, and that's what happens when we make the covenant, etc. So going onward, we should wonder why God will drive out the Canaanite in Exodus 34, but it's because he wants to give us the land of the covenant for an end time when you can't buy, sell, or hide. They will find you. They will torture somebody else to find you. Not going to be good. But Paul says if you're Christ, you're Abraham's seed, heirs according to the promise of land. And so God knows how to give us a good gift, and we can go there, I believe, in the end time if we're ready. And that's maybe why Christ said in the wedding parable of Luke 12, verse 32 and 3, "Fear not, little flock, it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell what you have." And I like Ellen White's edition of that in Duty in View of the Time of Trouble. She says, houses and lands will be of no use to the saints in the time of trouble. We'll have to flee before infuriated mobs if we try to hoard food and so on, and they'll take it from us. So we want to be heads up and ready for what's coming. Her last book was she titled The Captivity and Restoration of Israel. A sad situation that the publishers, Adventist Pacific Press, changed her title to A Meaningless Prophets and Kings. Doesn't get it when you understand her title came from Jeremiah 30, verse 3. I'll quote it for you. "Lo, the days come, saith the Lord, that I'll bring again the captivity of my people, Israel and Judah, calls them to return to the land that I gave their fathers, and they shall possess it." Well, I look forward to that. I'm looking forward to getting out of America, a land of murder, of baby infants, etc., and bondage. I think God is going to repeat the Exodus, as he said in Isaiah 11:11. He's going to recover the remnant a second time from Egypt. Okay, well, that's us. America's like Egypt, by its bondage of other people and throwing the babies in the trash, like Egypt did in the river. So most Christians think the rich young ruler made a bad choice when Christ told him to sell what he had and follow him, but he went away sad, and Luke's wedding parable offers us a better promise. I think we can be ruler over all that he has if we are so doing, and that includes sell what you got. Be ready. I mentioned Ellen White's Duty in View of the Time of Trouble. It's in Early Writings, one of her first books, page 56, 57. She says it is contrary to the Bible to make any provision for our temporal wants in the time of trouble. She saw that the saints would, if they had food laid up for them in the field or in the time of trouble, when sword, famine, and pestilence were in the land, it would be taken from them by violent hands, and strangers would reap their fields. Well, are we in view of the time of trouble? Is it our duty now? I think so, and I think that we've missed some signs in 2015 when it said the sun will be darkened, moon turned to blood before the day of the Lord, and the word for before, panim, means face or facing the day of the Lord. There was a rare solar eclipse on the equinox, followed by a blood moon on Passover in 2015. And also that year they had the peace and safety. Paul said when they're saying peace and safety, sudden destruction is coming. That's 1 Thessalonians 5. Every phrase in that first few verses fits Egypt. It came as a thief in the night when God came as a thief in the night and took their slaves. Nobody saw God. Peace and safety, Pharaoh said when they went into the Red Sea. But you can search YouTube now for chariot wheels, and you can see them at the bottom of the Red Sea. Proof that the Bible is true today. Well, there are three timelines that signal end times for 2023, and we've mentioned these before, but I'll just mention them again. When God delivered Israel from Egypt and took them out, it was a Jubilee event. Jubilees came on 50 years, and 50 years from Roe v. Wade is 2023, next year. Joel, first chapter, verse 3 and 4, mentions 4 generations, and a Bible generation is 40 years, where in Hebrews 3, 9, and 10, God bore the rebellious generation 40 years in the wilderness. 4 times 40 is 160 years, and Adventist Church formed in 1863. 4 generations bring them to 2023 when nothing is left in Joel 1, verse 4. After cankerworm, palmerworm, locust, what the locust leaves, the caterpillar eats, there's nothing left. I think a sad situation for Adventism if they don't wake up and get it right. The church has kept the door closed to truths like the statutes and judgments, the covenant, the annual Sabbaths. They divide the word Sabbath, Shabbat, into some we keep, seventh day, and some we don't. This annual Sabbath. Well, Christ is the word. He's not divided. Why should we divide that word? We should keep the annual Sabbaths as well. And it's the only way to know when things are going to happen. You know, Paul said they are shadows of things to come. He didn't say were shadows fulfilled at the cross. They are shadows and will click in at end time, as Ellen White implied. She said that the types relating to the second advent must be fulfilled at the time pointed out in the symbolic service. That's in her book Great Controversy, page 399, last line on the page. Well, I appreciate your considering this. I want to see just right now how much time I've had. I'm almost at the end. Glad I looked right now. I got 1 minute left. So I want you to go to YouTube to the link below, or search my name, Richard Ruling, and the title, Megaquake 2023. And you can get my book free next Friday. It's a free book. If you have Kindle, you can download it into your PC or phone or whatever. They give you a free app, and it makes you able to do that. So that, they want to sell their books, and you get their books usually cheaper without paying for paper, postage, ink, things like that. And they arrange a special where I can offer it free occasionally. And so next Friday, May 6th, it's free. Go to the get my book, and you'll be able to understand it better. Or if you miss it, go to my website, healthhappinessdestiny.com, and it's also available there, along with a DVD and a companion book that's excellent. So nice to talk to you. Thank you for your help. I'm over time now. God bless you. Second half coming soon. Bye.